Cathedral, and Bishop Emeritus Jackson Koskei, also nominated Member of Parliament. Talk about church and state on the bench. Gentlemen, let me ask you this. Bishop, let me ask you this question and your thoughts. President Ruto has had a very close relationship with evangelicals and Pentecostals like the Deliverance Church, right? What does the church expect in return?
Well, I think all biblical believing churches do not expect anything from the obvious, the freedom of worship in the country, because churches are institutions which are self-driving. Their allegiance is to their holy book and the doctrines of the book. Religion stays as it is. When you talk about what is the church expecting, perhaps you are talking about excesses. You hear here and there people talking. But I think the greatest thing that the church requires when you talk about evangelical churches is freedom, that they are able to exercise their faith freely in the country. They are able to share their faith with the rest, and that they can do whatever they are doing as a church without interference by the state. And what I mentioned, that the original philosophy and jurisprudential concept in the separation of state and church was that freedom of the church will not be interfered, unless, of course, when it is outside the doctrine of the church, and it is causing disorder in the country or taking advantage of their freedom, then the state, and mandated by the Holy Book, is there to make sure that such excesses cannot be done. And the scripture gives the same. So I think your question is so profound that you might have want to break it into pieces. They call it in literature a break-in statement.
Canon, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, you would.
Yes, even as we talk about the government, the political government, let's also talk about the government of the church.
Yes.
Because a church that is not regulated is dangerous.
Yes.
So while you seek for freedom, please let us also regulate the church. As we challenge corruption in the government, let us also challenge corruption in the church. As we challenge about bad governance, let us also challenge bad governance in the church. Because Bishop will agree with me that what we see in politics is a replica of what we see in church as well. And so if we only look at politicians without introspecting ourselves as religious leaders, that freedom you're talking about is dangerous. If you look at the number of churches that we have in Kenya, with all the freedom that we have, Jeff, let me take Kibera, for example. They have more NGOs and churches than toilets. In other words, you must balance things. People in Kibera need more toilets than churches. And sometimes churches is about competition. The other day we were talking about controlling the noises. You mean the church requires the government to regulate that? They can't regulate themselves? To know that there are people in the neighborhood who may be of another different church or may not even be Christians, and they have the freedom, by the way. We must create a civil society in Kenya that accommodates our own diversities. Yeah. But sometimes in the name of freedom, many Christians, and I'm one, they do that in the name of freedom, but it's a lack of discipline.
Absolutely. Good point. Good point. Let me ask you this, Canon. During the election campaign period, there was talk of an alleged MOU between the church and then candidate Ruto. Do we know the contents of that MOU?
Well, I've been in the leadership of the church. I haven't heard of such an MOU.
Bishop?
I have not seen it myself, but I heard about it, that the representative of churches had a conversation with the head of state. And I think it can go beyond what the church ordinarily has been asking for. Like, for example, when Canon talk about corruption, for example, it relates to some of the excesses in exercise of freedom in some churches and some leadership. But mainstream leadership of the church are contributing towards the social welfare of society, like building schools, like hospitals, like helping in terms of social empowerment. And I think if the church has to have anything through an MOU, is never outside that, because they cannot ask an MOU because of faith. They can ask an MOU if it is possible to import some of the utility instruments, assistive devices. Like, for example, we were in Bomet recently with the president, and one church is building a $5 billion facility that is going to serve, it will be one of the biggest hospitals in East and Central Africa. And they are importing a machine from outside this country that we may not have to go out looking for it. And they were asking the president to have a waiver on it. Of course, when the president took the podium, he refused. He said, I can't open that gate now.
It's very dangerous.
It is very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yes, I know you are well-meaning, but we can do that differently, other than interfering with the principle of tax collection in the country. So my understanding that if there was any MOU, it had nothing to do with different standing for Christian church in Kenya, except matters of social contribution, and they might have been asking along that areas.
Yeah.
And so that anything that is done for the society will have some tax relief or something. Yeah.
Right.
Jeff, if there is such an MOU that was done between the church and the current president, he needs to be very careful. Otherwise, the state can easily become captured by the church. You remember those days when senior bishops would be given exemption to import cars and all that. Some people got into business. And that's why following the law always is good. It equalizes people. The government can give mission hospitals concession in a different way. But the moment you open such a Pandora's box, then you'll not say no to a Muslim, to another. It becomes chaotic. And that's why, in fact, this is one of the most religious government we've, I think, had in the history of Kenya. Yeah. Wonderful, good, if it is properly regulated. If it is not, this is likely to be one of the most chaotic government we've had in the name of matters of faith. Let us all be under the law. That's how civil societies are created, because of the law.
Canon, you commented on this earlier on, but let me just ask you, you can espouse on it a little further. There's been an animated debate about all these Sunday prayer rallies, right? The fact that a lot of accusations about them being more political rallies than prayer services. And also politicians using the same pulpit as the preachers. I mean, is that right?
A friend of mine today told me that the church is on trial. Both the leadership in terms of bishops and the clergy, but also the laity. We are on trial. Do you know why people lose faith? Do you know why people become disillusioned about faith? It is because of what is currently happening. Today, in the news, I've heard the Azimio wants to do a prayer for IEBC. Hello, if you needed prayers, there are two ways you can mobilize people. One, tell all churches this Sunday is a day of prayer. And the president can choose whichever church to go, and the entire nation will pray. You don't need to bring people together. People can pray from wherever they are. And one component about prayer is sincerity of the heart. That's why Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 talks about when you want to pray, close your door. Go in there. What we are seeing now is public display of our religion or religiosity. And let me tell you, you can easily package yourself as religious, but you're not godly. Godliness and religion are two different things. Godliness is guided by the ethos and the dogmas of the Bible, but religiosity is about public display. Each of the political divide wants to be in the headlines of a newspaper the following morning. IBC needs prayers, and we pray for it. It doesn't require a political group to go and pray for them. Let me even change this. If there was no rain for the next 5 years, that's a possibility, by the way. And sometimes it has to do with nature or God or whatever you may interpret. But look at Egypt. How many times do they receive rain?
Very few.
But who produces some of the best fruits?
And wheat.
Look at Israel.
Yeah.
Look at some of the Arab countries. What they have done now is to go into new technology of farming and producing enough food to an extent of importation. We keep talking, there's a lot of talk about the things we will do and many promises that people were promised. But there's very little about what is happening. Mm-hmm. Kenyans don't want rhetorics. Kenyans want actions that are tangible. So those prayer rallies, and I have argued in my tweet, they are not prayer rallies. They are political rallies or Thanksgiving services disguised in religion. Unfortunately, our bishops and clergy have been hoodwinked, and they have believed. Those are for the politicians. My suggestion to the current government is, if you want to go to church, please go. Worship with genuineness. Go home.
Yeah. Bishop, before I get your reaction to Koinange's answer there, let's take a look at the tweet you sent last week. There you go. There you go. It's right there on the wall. It says, you said, the ongoing prayer rallies are not genuine. They are political meetings disguised as prayer meetings. Unfortunately, the church has been hoodwinked. Pastors and bishops are political brokers on hire by the political class. They are on their payrolls. A very sad state of the church. The salt has lost its taste.
The church has lost its taste.
Oh, taste, and the light
has lost its brightness.
Uh-huh.
I want to stand with those words. By the way, that's the flyer was not by me. It is said it is Citizen Media. But Citizen Media wrote to me today and said they are not the ones. It's somebody who picked my words from my Facebook page. And I was commenting about the cartoon on the Daily Nation on Sunday, where a bishop is praying for the Azimio leader and the Kenya Kwanza leader. But in the next page, it says later or immediately after, they remove their jackets and quickly get into now throwing words at each other. And that's when I made that tweet. There was also an old cartoon that was there of politicians coming to a bishop praying for them. Now things have changed. It is now pastors being served by the politicians. I want to stand by that and say, if we are not careful, we are going to lose church. People will be disillusioned about their faith. If you have two groups that are praying, Azimio and Kenya Kwanza, if one of them don't get the answer, they blame God, that God was not on our side. Hello, don't put God in your politics. You do your politics, sell your manifestos, implement them. Please put God away from here.
Absolutely. Bishop.
Well, while I think the comment starting from the tweet given by Provost, I think the intention in the message is good, but I think the wordings is a bit harsh. You don't throw the water, I mean,
the baby and the baby water.
The baby and the baby water. Because I don't believe that you can renegade the well-meaning pastors and bishops who participate in these prayers to be described in that very harsh words, that they are brokers, they are political sycophants. I think it will be a bit harsh, but I would understand him speaking as a priest. Of course, it is different from how I would address now. I used to say it, and I used to speak it up.
What has changed?
He knows me.
Of this man?
But now that...
Parliament?
Parliament?
Nothing has changed me.
Power?
Nothing has changed me. But the approach to things is a bit... I read a book the other day by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits Effective People Should Remember. And one of the very interesting things, and that comes from a political leader, is that while you must be proactive in your discourses, he said you must think win-win. That is now in leadership when you are talking about inclusion in society, you're talking about diversity in society. Speaking from Parliament, you speak on behalf of the people of Kenya, living in a diverse. He speaks from a monolithic approach because he's speaking from the pulpit of the church, and he declares as given the dictates from the word of God. Now, I agree with that to that extent, but the presentation in that argument is a bit harsh in that it renegades the well-meaning brethren. I don't think every one of them has bad intention when they go to church. Of course, I agree with him on the side where they are losing control when the politicians take over the mic. And when they take the mic, they do what they are good at doing it. And that is one. The other issue is generally the society needs to be tolerant because he referred to this side going for prayers, and that is what happened even during the campaigns. You remember when this one goes to this church, another one goes to the other church, and we don't really, we are not tolerant as Kenyans to listen to us. Remember the campaigns of 1970s where people opposing each other would use the same podium. And I remember in my home, 2 gentlemen, they used to, the late Eric Bomet and Edward Kiptanui, and they could share one pulpit. And they could tear into each other's policies, and you think the one talking is going to carry the day. When the other one rises up, at the end of the day, it is like a debate in American contest, in what we call presidential debate. And they are free to tear each other, but with decorum. Yeah. I think not necessarily, notwithstanding religious stand and concerns like my brother has expressed, I think as Kenyan leaders, Jeff, Harvard Gardner, who is a professor of anthropology for many years in the Harvard University, in one of his books, and I recommend you read it, The Leading Minds, he said that all societies remains amorphous groups, not until leadership comes to provide divination. And that the history of the world is not about common men, but it is about leaders as they divined their generation, end of quote. So I think what we would say, speaking from a faith-based philosophy, is that we are appealing to Kenyan leaders. If they are religious, notwithstanding which religion they belong to, whether Islam, Christianity, or the divide, whether evangelical or mainstream, or the Conference of Catholicism, or animist, and any one of us, we must develop a culture of tolerance so that as we speak as leaders, we are responsible. We risk being fundamentalists. Yeah. And you stand very strong where Absolutely. You are. That's what I can say about that.
And that's when then national prayers should bring everybody together.
Correct.
The president become the unifier rather than the divider.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, I want you to listen to another clip by the president at the National Prayer Day at Nyayo Stadium. We'll talk about the elections. Let's take a listen.
I was worried pale nyuma wakati niliona viongozi wengi wa kanisa wamenunua uoga, wameambiwa maneno ati kanisa haifai.
Ati kanisa haifai, Bishop. Your thoughts?
I don't know. I think there was a statement which was taken out of context, maybe, or it was misrepresented when the former Prime Minister talked about Christianity had been elevated in this country above all religions, and that might stop if this new if this dispensation changes. I think that this is what raised some concern, and I'm sure it really made some uproar in Christian church. I want to assume that is what the president was referring to. I don't think, because at that time there was a lot of conversation that came, and majorly from the evangelical churches, because the evangelical churches represents the charisma. My brother understands that during the Reformation age, they broke away by the Anglicans from Catholicism, and then they broke away during the Middle Ages of this, they call it the charismatic group that were born out of the priests at that time. And this graduated to 1900 when we had the Pentecostal movements and so on. So and majority of the mainstream religious organizations and leaders at that time were so much close to the state. The only country in Europe that went secular full blast was France. You'd come to Britain, the Nordic countries remain close to the church and worked with the church. And you can look at cities and are established by religious contribution.
Around the cathedral.
Around the cathedrals. And so I think from that kind of argument, you find that evangelical have been on the defensive. Majorly, they were born in the migration of European into the new lands. And majority of the political leaders, social leaders of the people at that time, where evangelical church grew, was more rebellious to the Queen of England, right, as they traveled to the new lands, New America, for example. And this is where evangelical was born. As a result, after the Berlin Conference discourse, in 1885, 1884, 85, and the demarcation of developing countries among the kingdoms of Europe, where Africa was divided by 5 nations and others. They moved with the church with a policy of invasion and conquering the natives. And how to conquer the natives, you had to conquer their culture and tradition. And there is no law that can be passed in Parliament to reform morality and the concept of traditions and traditional leadership, which was targeted by the new imperialism. Because of that, they used religion. And the biggest culprit in that religious group included the mainstream churches. So when evangelical came 100 years later, they were given an embargo that you preach the gospel, do the mission, convert people, but never enter into the arena of rights in issues and that is how churches were registered. I grew up, I served in the country. I'm one of the, my brother can attest, I was ordained as a lay minister in 1977 by the late Manasseh Kuria. I have roots in the Anglican Church. Then I've grown in the evangelical church up to executive position. And for 45 years, I have interacted as an historian with the movement of the church in history. Yeah. And because of that, you can tell that the evangelical church is very, very sensitive when government pronounce certain statements, and they can sometimes overreact.
Kenan, you want to say something?
Well, just to say that, yes, I don't know whether it was a political maneuver that one candidate was seen to be pro-church, who is now the current president. And I know he took advantage of that very quickly, and that's why you see him riding with the evangelicals. And the other candidate, who is in the opposition, was made to look like he's against the church,
yes,
which is not true. And that's why some of us, whom we call the mainstream churches, have been at the middle. We have come to know, if we swing with the government, you lose it.
Yeah.
If you lose the government, you lose it. We have wanted to establish ourselves in a safe space that we can speak without being fearful.
Yeah. Bishop, real quick, before we go to another clip, how are churches accountable, especially when it comes to the one-man church? You know, you talk about there's so many churches in Kibera, more than toilets. They're literally one-man churches. How are those accountable?
I would give a quick response that I think analysts about this one-man church rushes quickly with a very judgmental mind. Every church and every religious movement starts with one man. Look at Christianity. Started with a man, Jesus, divinely, as we may want to give the definition. Talk about Zoroastrianism, which is the oldest religion in the world, was started by Mr. Zoroaster. So what happens is that, and we talk about Wesleyan, who really is son of a priest, and
Martin Luther
and other. They started from one man. So let us demystify first the question of one man, because we are trying to criminalize that as Kenyans and as analysts, and we create paralysis out of that. The problem that comes with these one-man ministries is that they create a system that the same cannot be inherited. It becomes dynastical. The church has three principal system of governments in history, Jeff. We have what we call episcopal, which is more dynastical. You can understand it's like monarchical. We have what we call Presbyterian type of government, and what you can consider in a political world as parliamentarian. That is where parliamentarians concept had an understanding in the Christian world. And then there is what they call the congregational, which is more or less like free reign, where people wake up one morning and they say you are a pastor, wake up another day and they say you are not a pastor. The people, then they do it democratically. Of course, they say spiritually, and some pastors are thrown out of their pulpit. They cannot remain in the cathedral the way he has done it. One morning, members say you are not our preacher today. So what happens is that the founder of any organization becomes a one man. We call it the vision bearer. Now, the problem we have with these people is that majority of them are self-made. Majority of the founders of Christian movements in the world are people who are prepared. Either they were former priests, they were former catechists, they were people who were trained by the mainstream organization, like Martin Luther, for example, who broke away from Catholicism. He was a priest with his wife, Kathy, who was a nun. When they broke away to bring in reformation of the church in 13th century, he came out as a trained minister. So one of the unfortunate situation, which my brother alluded to, by saying self-regulation of these organizations should not be weak enough to invite the state to regulate them.
Okay.
And as I said in my opening remark, Jeff, that the state has a cardinal and godly responsibility to protect the citizens against pseudo-faith or damaging beliefs. And God has created governments, and that's a concept of the Holy Book. So, but I differ with a situation where people have bastardized Christianity by talking about Africans who started churches, became independent, really. They are breaking away from the mainstream organization.
Right.
And I accept the challenge as a Christian leader that these are our sons, these are our daughters. We failed to mentor them.
Okay, you know what, Bishop? Clearly, you know your religion very well, and your history,
do I?
And your history of religion.
Do I?
It's very impressive. And I'm going to digress for a moment and ask you this question, right?
Sure.
The Western churches are embracing same-sex marriages,
Yes.
right? They pray to the same God as you do. But your church the other day said you're not going to agree with Mother Church, for instance. You were talking about mother churches and branches. What are your thoughts?
You see, Jeff, and I think we alluded to this earlier, every society at one point must grapple or respond to the social, cultural problems that they face. And what the Church of England, and remember, even before the Church of England went that direction, by the way, it's the blessing, not marriage. In fact, if you read the statement by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the marriage canon still stands. It's between one man, one woman in a long life heterosexual relationship. But they are maybe accommodative, sympathetic to also people, and that is what you would call cultural context that they were addressing.
Right.
And in my argument last Sunday, as I read the statement by the Archbishop of Kenya, which I agree with it totally, is let's not fix ourselves too much to the Church of England. Can the Church of Kenya, inclusive, deal with the challenges that we face in our socio-cultural context? By the way, the gay problem is not in Europe. It is right here with us. I used to say I have not met people who are gay. Today I wouldn't say that. I have met them, I have listened to them, we have differed biblically, because as a priest, I need to look at Scripture and what it teaches, and that's what I will teach. But in terms of my pastoral approach, I must listen to every person that comes to me. Every human being requires dignity, respect, and honor, despite the diversity, despite the difference we may have. But the Kenyan church has also bigger problems that it needs to grapple with. And at the beginning of our discussion, I talked about issues of corruption, for example, that you see in church today. So as Europe grapples with their problem, one of the things that, because I followed the debate, what I liked about them is the civil debate, discussion they had. They differed, they never fought about their differences. Can we create a situation, and I think you talked about tolerance, where people can discuss issues that divide them, whether they are political, religious, or cultural, or contextual. It is very important for society to go through that. Currently, same-sex marriage is not a big problem in Kenya per se, but Kenyan society has bigger challenges. Like we talked about, the whole of today's news is about depression, a depressed society. If you look at the disintegration of marriages, for example, the divorces and separation, the people killing each other in homes, I wish the Kenyan church would actually discuss such things openly so that we respond to the needs of our time.
Absolutely. Should we go on to another soundbite?
Can I make a comment?
Yes, indeed, Bishop.
All civilizations and I'm glad you have recognized that I'm a student of history.
You are, indeed.
All civilizations, the major ones, about 7 of them, I'm not about to enumerate them, rose and collapsed on the argument of divination of morality. Obedience to law is driven by moral responsibility more than punitive jurisprudent demands. Today, I can say now that is my religious part, that is as a faith leader, that Europe and its culture is in its lowest ebb. Africa is still higher in morality now. It's higher than Europe. We still have humanity in our decisions. In Europe, it has shifted from humanity to rights. Rights. Even humanity is rights, but definition of rights is relative. As people think it is absolute. I was arguing with, after the Magna Carta Declaration of 1948, for example, which actually has taken effect in government, in social organizations, in families, whereas there are so many margin gains. I am a physically challenged person. I'm a beneficiary in terms of that rights being emphasized, that people must be respected, and that our rights has been raised to a higher level. The recognition of gender, for example, and the recognition of diversity in society, and the question of the interpretation of minority and so on. But at the same time, Jeff, every good concept has its negative side. When the church is saying in Africa, that in Latin America, that we want to stand, the Anglican community, for example, this was not the first statement. I think during Wabukala's time, the same statement was pronounced.
Even,
and with the
even Zimbi time.
Yeah, even in Zimbi time. Because the moral platform of the African church still stands on a better ground. We are meeting with Europeans as they come down. And one of the obvious impact, which now will create a conversation in the next dispensation, is how the population of the Caucasian community in the world is diminishing. It is becoming a minority. And they are worried to the core. You speak about European nations per standard today in terms of population is almost a ratio of 70 to 30% in terms of the younger population, the older population of the Caucasian community. It is believed that in the next perhaps 20 or 30 decades, in the next 3 or 4 decades, the migration into the northern hemisphere will be populated by the south and the east. The reason why this is happening is that the population of the Caucasians, who are the inhabitants and the owners of technology that is driving the Western world, is diminishing. So who is replenishing them? It is east, south. Islam, for example, is the fastest growing religion in this century, whereas Christianity is still ahead with an estimated population of 2.5 billion. Islam is growing, and it is the second largest religion with 1.5 million.
Billion.
And billion, thank you so much. And it is growing very fast. One of the secrets is how they treat family. And the African continent still grows, despite the fact that we have been dying of malaria, we died of slavery, we lost about 4 million people. Africa has had unstable economies. We have never enjoyed freedom after independence, and we've been subjected to wars that we don't know even why we are fighting. And yet, Africa today is over 1.34 billion. We are still growing. The secret, family. Now, when we discuss the issue of same-sex marriage, it's not about the evil of the human beings behind that. We are talking about the impact of our society. And this is a very vibrant discussion. We are not declaring any evil. And I agree with the Provost when he said the priority of our argument. And even the former president, when he was addressing the international community, he did us the greatest a proud statement as he represented us. He said, we cannot bring this argument now. This is not our problem.
It's not our problem.
Right.
It's not our problem.
No.
So you can see where we are coming from,
Absolutely.
both traditionally, religiously. We Christian religions in Africa, we are not naive. People should not mistake that the African is of a lesser acumen. We have some of the best brains in Africa. And today, Kenyans should take confidence that most of the religious leaders now are among the most educated class in our history. It is not standard 7 failures, as they used to. We don't take religion as an option of failing. You can listen to me, listen to Provost. You are not talking to dead minds.
Yeah, no, these are good. These are bright minds.
And we are very progressive.
You are indeed.
That's just
Gentlemen, take a listen to the president once again yesterday at Nyayo Stadium, the National Prayer Day. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Walikuwa wanamwambia hata hii ukuta unajenga hii, mbweha peke yake akisimama juu yake inaanguka. Kwani mliambiwa huyo Sanballat na Tobias waliisha? Si wako. Lakini nawauliza, kuta ya Yerusalemu ilijengwa ama ya Yeriko ilijengwa? Haikujengwa. Si ilijengwa. So wachana na Sanballat na Tobias, wajishughulishe na ile wanashughulisha. Kenya itaenda mbele.
Cannon, who is Tobias?
I think Cannon can comment on that.
I was very concerned when I heard that yesterday.
Yes.
And not just him. There were others that I will not mention, where you start branding people, certain names that represent certain characters. I even heard yesterday of somebody saying in the last election, it was about God's army and the army of the evil.
Yeah.
You see, that in Christianity and back to tolerance, we don't do that.
Yeah.
I think the president should be moderate, should not brand. And by the way, I'll tell him what one time I told the former president. Once you are elected, you become the president of all Kenyans, regardless of their diversities. To me, and this is my small critique on the current government, they are too, I think it's like they have not weaned themselves out of campaigns and politics. Hello, if you know you are elected, you have your manifesto, you know the challenges Kenyans are facing, please go straight and address the problems of Kenyans. Tobias and Sanballat, the army of God and the army of the devil, such language is very divisive. Serve Kenyans. And I was very happy the other day to see the president go to Luo Nyanza and start working with the people there. I wish he would maintain that. Both the president and the deputy need to tone down their language. And this thing of branding Kenyans, don't brand them. There are people who will always support you, even us.
Yes,
in our
absolutely.
leadership, even in the church.
Absolutely.
Not everybody will support you.
And you have to give them sacrifice.
But you don't brand them. You don't deny them communion. And say, you, Jeff, the other day you said this, today you're not having communion. We don't do such things. No, we are tolerant. We'll listen to people even who may not like us. So, as a Christian leadership, what they are doing is actually wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Let's move on.
Sure.
Dorcas Rigathi, herself a very religious person. I think she's a pastor or something, yeah?
Yeah.
in the church?
I
Sure.
think because he's more evangelical than me, he's better placed to talk about
She's a
that.
pastor.
Okay, let's hear what she had to say at the National Prayer Meeting.
There was a day of showdown between the man of God and the prophets of Baal. And I could tell that this day is that day when Kenya rose and we wanted to show down between the forces of darkness and the forces of light.
Bishop?
Sorry, Jeff, I was avoiding to bring the wife of the deputy president. I didn't want to mention. Now that you've brought it, that is the language that leaders should avoid. And we Christians should never have such a language. It's like you are negating the very faith you are professing when you do that to people.
Bishop, do you agree? I mean, she's talking about the battle between the man of God and prophet of Baal.
Well, I want to talk about, I would like to respond to you from context, where I come from. I wouldn't listen with a view of creating a debate or discourse to spouses. I would take on the leader on whose account this country was called and elected to provide leadership to the country. The way Bishop has, did you see him avoid? It is you who has brought the temptation. In Africa, we don't go that direction. Now that you have asked, and we are before a national platform, I go back to what I say, as leadership defines their own generation, at the level at which such statements are made, the expectation, and I go to the book of Stephen Covey, he talks about number 2 in the 7, that think win-win. That is tolerant. Let's manifest tolerance. But because this is a political stage, there is nothing like you can understand where I'm coming from. It is a question of what have you said, because it makes news. It influences the society. So I agree with Provost, and I think we need to look at it, that we need to, Mo used to say, I am driving a bus, and in it I carry everybody, including pickpocketers. I carry people who really are good gentlemen, and but all of them I must carry them to a destination in the future. So as leadership in the country, there are some statements, and all the statements, and all the time, we must project what you call tolerance.
Yeah.
I think I can use that term.
Absolutely.
To avoid extremism in the description.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, I just want to add, and I agree totally with you, Bishop, let's be careful that we don't create a cultic government. Cultism is dangerous. And religions that have survived for long in the history of the church are churches that are regulated, moderated within themselves. In our current government situation, if you critique the government, you look like you are the enemy of God. Now that's cultism. When you listen to the political leadership, unfortunately now it's going to their wives, they become so cultic that people follow them blindly. So some of us who have a critical mind look like we are ungodly. That's again dangerous. One of the things that I would tell the president is, please get used to being critiqued. As a leader, allow that to happen. In fact, open a forum where you can hear people and their concerns. And I hope he's listening. What they are doing now is creating a bad culture. If it continues that way, we are going to actually lose our own Christian freedom because of cultism in political leadership.
Speaking of wives, First Lady Rachel Ruto. also at the prayer, National Prayer Service. Let's take a listen.
Come on, Jeff.
I want the bishop
To the desires of your heart, like Dr. Lai was preaching, he says, people seated here today are going to be millionaires because the Lord is going to bless you.
I want to take an excuse again in the Provost, because he's speaking from the priesthood.
Right.
This is where now priesthood requires what we call understanding. These two ladies are speaking from the pulpit because they are more priests in their own domain than they are politicians. So I would understand if, when you ask me that question, I become tolerant on that basis. Like I was saying, if I were to speak the same thing they are saying now that I'm a politician, I would not say it the way they are saying it. But if I spoke before I retire, I would speak from a monolithic understanding and standpoint of the scripture. However, when you are elected into office, the realization of a universal approach, because you have been voted in not by Christians alone, you have been voted in by secular people, you have been voted in by Muslims, you have been voted in by Indians, you have been voted in by animists, those who they believe in ancestral faith. So when you come up, they saw in you a universality. And then your religion becomes private, faith becomes private. Amendment number 1 in the United States Constitution solved this particular issue by saying religion becomes a faith of an individual. Yeah, and it is to you. And it became guided by the instrument of law. Our Constitution, the same, removes that religious state and espouses a secular state. So Jeff, I wouldn't encourage the thing that are they political philosophy of the country. I don't think so. I want to think that the people. Was it Jefferson or who said the buck stops and
the buck stops with me?
With me.
Yes.
So let us speak to where the buck stops at, and like my brother was addressing, the irresponsibility at times of the priests. During this time, they should be able to be in control of the prayers and be able to moderate any statement once. Even in the church, sometimes people or religious gathering, there are some elders who, because of other reasons, they make excessive statement. It is the duty of the priest in church to bring everybody to the middle. So I want to concur with him that in all these meetings, let us take church. Let the bishops and ministers take church.
But Jeff,
Yes.
just to give a rejoinder, we the clergy don't speak from a monolithic point of view. We don't. We are aware that the congregation seated in front of us, first and foremost, like at All Saints Cathedral, they are all Anglicans, possible. Now, during times of COVID, now the cathedral has become open to everyone. So nowadays, even as I preach, I'm careful because not everybody is Anglican. And so we don't look at things from a monolithic point of view. When you know how much the world has suffered because of religious fanaticism.
Yeah.
And I asked at the beginning of the show, if we had a Muslim president and they spoke the way our political leaders have spoken in the rally, how would Christians feel? Please, if you'd feel pained, be careful. Also, it is incumbent on our president and his deputy. You know, Bishop is now very careful because he's in two worlds. Me, I'm not in two worlds. Yes. I'm in one.
Yeah.
I'm speaking on behalf of Kenyans. There is excessiveness, religious excessiveness. And this one will not engender Christianity in Kenya. It will actually diminish Christianity in Kenya. People will become disillusioned about matters of faith. Please, you can tell your wife now, from now moving forward, I know you are a pastor or a bishop, tone down for the sake of everybody who elected us. So some of those, and again, we know the danger of preaching prosperity gospel. And I hope at the end, by the end of the show, you'll give me a chance to talk about what does Kenya need. One of the things that Kenya need is the culture of work, hard work, genuine work. Don't preach there. And that's why sometimes I said that some of those bishops that I saw there on Sunday, they look like they are on hire. Because how could you start saying such things? And I wish you listened to the entire sermon by the bishop. It wasn't scriptural. It was exaggerated. It was meant to excite the congregation. We must move away from there, Bishop. Let's teach God's word. It has power to liberate people.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, we can talk about this all day, all night. The topic.
Especially with the two of us.
Yes, indeed. Which means you're just going to have to come back another time to talk some more. But I wouldn't let you go without a couple of closing thoughts.
Sure.
Bishop, you got 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Don't give us a history of religion. Just give us some closing thoughts going forward.
Sure. I by giving history really is not meant to offend, but I think it's
enriching us.
It enriches,
absolutely,
because it solves identity crisis, stabilizes our present, give us confidence about the future. So I want to say that I believe in this country. Kenyans are great people. They're a very resilient nation. What we Kenyans need is leadership that drives them for a progressive social growth economically. If it rains tomorrow, for example, 6 months later, you will wonder how this country will be, the way they have recovered. We've come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. It really devastated us and our economy, but Kenyans came out a resilient people. Yeah. So I still want to go back to the opening remarks that the fourth estate, which is we cherish, and that's why my brother and I, when got the invitation, we came quickly, because we value the role the media plays in disseminating information in this country and shaping the opinion of the nation. Your philosophy should be tampered with a care for a vulnerable society, ravaged by a struggling economy. You can see how we are struggling with the issue of children. You have just given us, by the news today, 400,000 students who have not reported to school on the program of junior, progressing to junior. That tells you there is some sense of despondency in the country. The report was given the other day that some parents had sneaked their children to do standard 8 this year, because this is the end of the same group. Correct. And they were reprimanded. It tells you that Kenyans are not sure about transiting our children into CBC. We need a lot. So in the fourth state, we are making an appeal. Secondly, we would like the leaders in the country to be sensitive about where the nation is and how our society is. When you see our young men giving up themselves to excessive alcohol, drugs abuse, and so on, it tells something about hope in our society, that our young people are getting hopeless. It is a discussion. It is an issue that needs to be progressed. Would you like to have more discussion on that as for the state? I think it is a good idea. You can invite every one of us. How does the Muslim approach this? What is happening in their world? How is the church doing in this country? How are other institutions and players in social empowerment, so that we can speak to the nation a message of hope?
Absolutely.
Of hope. Nothing, we've lost a bit, nothing is lost. And let Kenyans moderate themselves.
Yes, indeed.
Yep.
Hope springs eternal.
Absolutely.
Canon, you get the last word.
Yes, just 4 things that I would like to say. Number 1, we need to work on our work ethics. We are hard-working people, but sometimes we work hard the wrong way. The levels of corruption in this country are at very high levels. And while we celebrate the political leadership in the history of Kenya, they took advantage, unfortunately, of the people, and we created a culture. Today, if you don't steal, you are very, very special.
Yeah. Or very dumb.
Or very dumb. If you don't give money, people think you must have a problem. Work ethics. Let us learn to work hard. And if there's anything that President Ruto would give Kenya as a gift, it is proper work ethics. Create a culture that is different. The second one is use of modern technology. If it doesn't rain today, shall we die? Quick. If we have brains in Africa, Bishop, please use the brains quickly to think about what have other countries done. Countries like South Korea is not even Christian. How do you explain that they are very far in terms of their technology? Egypt next to us here and North Africa. Why can't we use our technology to feed ourselves? It's a shame. If you look at the photos on our televisions of dying population, that we cannot be able to feed ourselves. Thirdly, let us be a country that produces. Importation will kill this nation. You look at the dollars, how high it has gone. Why can't we be a country that produces? If there is anything that the President and the Kenya Revenue Authority would do, is to help young startups of production. And Kenyans are creative. They can be able to produce for themselves and also produce for export. We are capable. Those are some of the encouragement that we should be doing. And that's what the Asian tigers have done. Now, today, they export everywhere. Yep. And fourthly, and the last is reduce the cost of government. The government is too expensive to run. If you look at the cars ministers use, why do we need guzzlers? I hope Bishop did not come with one today.
Yeah, I hope not.
Why can't we go to 2,000 cc? And I know President Kenyatta actually had done that. Let us cut on the loot that we see in this country. And most of the loot happens in procurement. If a biro is 10 shillings in the supermarket, why should you pay 500 for a biro? The government should just cut. When it comes to meetings, why can't you have them locally here? Cut the expenditure and make corruption very expensive. Use legislators like him to do laws and imprison 10 serious guys and take their wealth and that one of their families. Kenyans will fear corruption. But when we see our leaders live a certain type of life, all of us will live like that. Leaders create cultures. And one of the cultures that the president would do is to declare his wealth. Let him declare his wealth. And everybody else in government should declare. Let this government be known as a government that has zero tolerance on corruption.
Absolutely. DPP dropping cases is also very disturbing.
Look at that, very disturbing.
Yeah. The Very Reverend Canon Samuel Wainaina, Provost, All Saints Cathedral, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Bishop Emeritus Jackson
the historian.
Nominated Member of Parliament. And Emmy's dad.
Yeah, sure.
She's your dad.
True. She's more famous than I am.
Emmy Koskei's father. Taunet Nelel. Love it. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Welcome.
We really appreciate it. That was a great conversation, and we should have more of those.
Welcome.
We need some moral heads to prevail. What a conversation. We're going to get your feedback a little later on. We still have some news, by the way, and business and sports, so stay with us. Jeff Koinange Live takes a break. We'll be back.